Okay, this is the sixth video in our Algebra Foundation series, and this video is about adding and subtracting real numbers. And when we're talking about real numbers, in this case, we're really going to be referring to integers, positive and negative. So I've set up four scenarios here, so we can look at how each one works. This is a common one and should be fairly obvious. 2 plus 3 is 5, right? Here we have a negative 2 plus 3, and I want you to note that I've put the negative 2 in parentheses because I want to be clear that I'm talking about negative 2 and not subtraction of something else over here. And what you'll learn through the course of algebra is that there really isn't that large of a difference between subtraction and negative, but this is just for clarity's sake. So negative 2 plus 3. So how do we look at something like this? Well, a way I like to think about it is I like to think about negatives versus positives. So in this case, I have two negatives. So I put one negative, two negative, and I've got three positives. So I put one positive, two positives, three positives. Now, it's important to note that every time there's a negative and a positive, they cancel each other out because one negative and one positive result in 0. So negative and positive, 0. Negative and positive cancel out to 0. And then once I've canceled out all my pairs, I see what I have left. In this case, I have one positive left. So I would say that this equals 1, which is true. Negative 2 plus 3 equals positive 1. We don't write the positive sign for positives. We only really include it for negatives. Another way of looking at this would have been to rewrite this problem as positive 3 minus 2, which again would have resulted in 1. That's the same question there. This, however, is not. This is 2 plus negative 3. And notice again, I've put negative 3 in parentheses to indicate that this is the one that is negative, and I don't want the two operations right next to each other, which can cause confusion. So the parentheses aren't necessary, but they're good for clarification's sake. So again, I'll go through and set up this same diagram for this new problem. So in this case, I've got three negatives. 1, 2, 3. And I've got two positives. 1, 2. And I'm lining them up so I can pair them easily and quickly figure out what's going on here. So I take that away, I take that away. And this time I'm left with 1 again, but this time the one that I'm left with is red, which means it's a negative 1. So this equals negative 1 and could be thought about in this way. We could have thought about this as 2 minus 3, which again would have been negative 1. Finally, I've got this scenario. Now this scenario is actually going to be most similar to the first scenario we did. This scenario is going to relate most closely with this scenario, and you'll see why in a second. I've got negative 2 and another negative 3. So negative 2 plus negative 3. And if I were to do my dots, I would do 1, 2, and then I'd do 1, 2, 3. Well, hold on, I've got no pairs because I've got no green dots. I've only got red dots. So in the end, since I'm only left with red dots, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's negative 5. So even though we're using the same numbers, depending on the signs, depending on what's negative and what's positive, we're going to end up with different results. Now we're going to look at the same four situations, but this time we're going to look at them as if they were subtraction instead of addition. Now this is a little bit unclear because it's not exactly like addition. Remember, in addition, the order doesn't really matter. In subtraction, the order matters. So the fact that the 2 is coming before the 3 versus the other way around will make a difference. So in this case, 2 minus 3. Well, 2 minus 3, you may have been taught in the past early on in your math career that you can't take it away because you don't have enough. Well, we know now that there are integers and that this will result in a negative answer like negative 1. Another way of thinking about this is, okay, if I have two positives and I want to take away from that 3, well, I don't have 3 to take away, so what I'm going to need to include there is another 0 pair. So I'll put in a green one, and I'll put in a red one, and I'll go ahead and take away 3. 3 positives. So I'll take away this positive, and this positive. What am I left with? Well, I'm left with 1 negative, and there it is. In the next scenario, I've got -2, and I want to take 3 away from that. So let's see what happens there. Well, first thing I do is write down my 2 negatives. One right there, one right there. I need to be able to take away 3 green dots, 3 positives. The problem is I don't have 3 positives. So what I do is I write in 3 0 pairs. 1, 2, 3. And I write in 3 positives. 1, 2, 3. Now, these 0 pairs I've added on. I haven't changed the problem. I've just put in 0 pairs because we can add 0 as many times as we want and not change anything. And now I have the ability to take away 3 positives. So I can take away 1, 2, 3. And I can look and see, what do I have left? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the answer to this is -5. Another way of rewriting this problem would have been to think about it this way, as -2 plus -3. Because adding a negative is the same as subtraction. So that's another way of thinking about it. Adding a negative is the same as subtraction. Let's look at this scenario. We have +2, and we want to take away -3. Okay. So 1, 2. We don't have any negatives here, so we're going to need 3 0 pairs. So 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And we want to take away 3 of the negatives. So we do 1, 2, 3 are all gone. And we're left with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. +5. Again, another way of writing this, when you have 2 negative signs like this together, I like doing this little trick just to remind me. It's a silly trick, but I usually do this and I say, oh, look, it's a smiley face. A smiley face is positive because 2 minus -3 is the same as 2 plus 3. It's a silly little trick, but it's an easy way of reminding yourself that 2 negatives will result in addition. All right, and our last scenario here, we have -2 minus -3. So I'm going to draw in my -2 dots. 1, 2. But I want to take away 3 negative dots, and I've only got 2, so I'm going to need a 0 pair. So I'm going to put in the negative and the positive part of the 0 pair, remembering that 1 negative and 1 positive produce a 0 pair, and we can add as many of those as we need to work with. And then I'm going to cancel out. I want to take away 3 negatives. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3. What am I left with? 1 positive. So -2 minus -3 equals 1. And again, another way of writing this, because it's 2 negatives next to each other, would have been -2 plus 3 equals 1. And that's how you add and subtract integers.